as Dom had mentioned, misinformation or lack of information is a really big issue out there. So RevUp is in one way helping to or trying to help overcome that by educating as many people as possible through various forms of outreach. So, especially now, we're kind of focusing more digitally through social media, through websites and blogs and such. But mainly, our tactic right now is a big push on showing how people can vote, explaining the different types of voting options, whether that's vote by mail, absentee voting in person, or at home through mail, or how you can safely vote at the polls. So we're talking about why it's important to vote, how you can vote, and what the impact of your vote is. That is the education that we're really trying to spread out. That is our first and foremost goal, is to make sure that people are aware of all this information. And we're doing that in as many ways as possible through social media, through blog posts, through creating uh, PDFs, voter guides, in as many methods as possible, whether that's plain language, FAQs, trying to create videos, and trying to have different forms of media. So that's one strategy that we're using at APD and RevUp. Along those lines, in order to make sure that people are informed, we're trying to inform ourselves first. So that means gathering as much information as possible. And every state pretty much has different rules and regulations when it comes to voting. Especially, it changes when it comes to voting with voters with disabilities, right? So it gets a little murky and confusing with guardianship rules, with rules for returning citizens or those who are incarcerated, whether a state has curbside voting or not, stuff like that. And we want to make sure that that information is accessible to everyone. So we are gathering that information first, making sure that we ourselves are aware of what is going on, what each state is doing, and then trying to put it in a way that is accessible to everyone, easy to read, easy to use. And so trying to disseminate that. That has been another strategy that we're working on, a project that we're trying to work on within APD along with other organizations as well. And speaking of the organizations, collaboration is huge. Whether you're APD or not, I think any organization, it's really important to collaborate, especially during this time. It is such a difficult time for many people, and coming together, uniting as a community, as a population, as organizations who are trying to serve people is really important. So we're really relying on our partners and hoping our partners can rely on us, and coming together to expand the disability vote through various ways. All of us are working together. Many of RevUp partners are on this call here, which is really great to see. So we're constantly having calls and meetings and such to just really figure out what is the best way to reach people who are already voting, and to encourage them to continue, and to reach people who either are discouraged, unsure, or just really uninformed about how to vote, why they should vote, who are apathetic. So these are issues that we are constantly working on. Where at RevUp, we're trying to make sure that the states and chapters that we do have are doing as much work as possible, that we're supporting them and giving them various resources. And we're trying to make sure that the states that don't have RevUp chapters are trying to, create their own, and are trying to reach locally, and disseminate resources locally, because it's important to not only vote in the federal and presidential elections, but also every single election, local, state, and federal. Every election has an impact on every single policy and every single person. And that is definitely information that we're trying to encourage to spread and make sure people are aware of, alongside the fact that this is a movement and momentum that needs to go beyond November. This doesn't end November 3rd. This continues onwards. The drive and the encouragement and the action that is happening right now, the excitement, the energy, it definitely needs to be continued onwards, cannot end this year. So we're really working hard and trying to come up with new ways to reach both the disability community, both the general population, and we're hoping to continue working both with, again, people within and outside the community. We're hoping to come together and reach as many people as possible to increase the disability vote. As you probably, as you know, is the largest minority group. We have so much power and we're not fully utilizing it. And if we fully utilize the disability vote, we can definitely make change. So I am hoping that, everyone goes out and votes and encourages their friends and family to go vote. Thank you.
Rachita, thank you so much. This is Jessica again. Really exciting to hear about the work that you're doing around the country. As far as folks that want to plug in with you or get some support, do you want to put in the chat how they can do that? Or you can go ahead and tell us if you'd like. Okay, looks like she's going to put it in the chat. Thank you so much for all that work. So next we're going to go to Norberto, who is not working on disability specific issues, but we get to hear about some voter turnout strategies. And I hope that you can talk particularly about, well, not to change things at the last minute, but I'm really interested in how do we do voter turnout work during the pandemic when door-to-door work is hard. We don't have big groups of people we can go talk to. So go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jessica, and thank you all for allowing me to speak to you. It's wonderful to be here this morning on obviously West Coast time. So yes, my name is Norberto and I work for Schools and Communities First, Proposition 15, which is an initiative on the California ballot that will reclaim about $12 billion a year to specifically invest in schools and communities. About 40% of the money will go directly to schools and the rest, 60%, will go to local municipalities to fund public assistance groups, healthcare, and any other thing that is deemed locally needed in those communities. So that said, my entire job is about turnout. It's about reaching voters. It's about educating them on what the proposition does. It's about doing what Dawn and Rachita have already said, creating that story of how they're going to vote. If they need support on figuring out how to vote, we provide that information. Most of the time it's directing them to the Secretary of State's website or their local county registrar's office. So we help them plan that information out. But what we have found out is that by telling a personal story and by telling them about the proposition, that's what makes people really support our proposition. Our opposition is out there with buckets of money, spreading lies. They actually lost the lawsuit saying that this proposition would impact homeowners, and that's not the case. This proposition keeps the Prop 13 property taxes for homeowners the same. It just requires big corporations to pay their fair share of property taxes. I don't know if you all may know, but Disneyland actually pays property taxes in Anaheim from 1975 tax estimate values, but their ticket prices have gone up 1,800% since 1975. So that's not fair. That costs local communities about $50 million a year. So that's what we're after, to make sure that there is a fair share of that money coming directly into the pockets of those communities that need it most. Obviously, many of you are already leaders in your communities and you're doing things to help. So I think that's where I come in to give you some more guidance of what you could do to help. And I'm going to put in a few links in the chat box if you don't mind. The first one that I'm going to put in is actually our Mobilize to sign up for phone banking. This is something that during the age of the pandemic, it's the gold standard, having those positive conversations with voters to make sure they hear from us first and not our opponents, and then to go and clarify what that opposition message may have looked like. So once they see that TV ad, tell them, you know what, that TV ad is actually misleading. That's not the case. Homeowners will pay the same rate that they've always paid unless they end up moving and they buy a new house, then that's a different story. But that said, we end up telling the truth about what's going on in your communities. And the other thing we're doing, and I'm going to put in a file in the chat box, is digital organizing using an app called Outreach Circle. The fascinating portion about Outreach Circle is it's an app you can install on a cell phone, and you reach out to people you know that are your contacts. If you have someone that's in our list that is a targeted voter, you can directly send them a message from your name, from your cell phone, and let them know, hey, I'm standing with Prop 15 because XYZ. You can always change those messages. So this is like another great way to be able to tell your personal story, build that momentum, share the positivity of what's going on with Prop 15. And then the last thing that we're currently doing is our social media ambassadors. And I'm just going to put in our Facebook for Prop 15 in the chat box. And one of the things that I've noticed personally, outside of talking to other voters about, is when you end up posting something about Prop 15 on social media, there's always questions from your friends and family, and then that might get shared and there's another question. So it's the same thing. It's building that momentum about who we are and telling the story of what the reality is about Prop 15 to combat that negative story and those lies that are coming out of the No on 15 campaign. So with that entire thing said and encapsulated, we tell the story about who we are, why we're supporting Prop 15. We help voters, we help educate voters on what Prop 15 does, what it doesn't do, and we remind them that the voting is coming. And then in the state of California, all voters will be receiving an absentee ballot in their mailbox. So we're happy that that's going on, but that polling locations are very different across the state. Some areas will have polling locations open 14 days prior to the election. Some have 3 days prior to the election. So we have to make sure we work with them to develop those plans and make sure that they actually go out to vote. One last comment I'll make: in the state of California now, we have only 20 days left till people start actively voting. Our big lump sum of votes will likely come in a little bit 2 weeks after that, but we are short on time now. So if any of you want to help, please sign up on our Mobilize, download Outreach Circle, and join me for one of those phone banks to make sure that Prop 15 passes and hopefully makes an impact on people's lives. Voting is a magical thing, and sometimes people's lives depend on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Norberto. This is Jessica again. Really honored to have you here. And, I put a comment in the chat that while this is a California specific ballot measure, it's also a really good model for other states about corporations paying their fair share. And, even if you're not in a position of starting a statewide ballot measure, I think it's an important issue for us all to be aware of and start educating disability communities about. And I also put a question in here for us to talk about in the chat, or maybe later, is, are independent living centers and other disability organizations putting out recommendations for ballot measures. But while we can't endorse candidates if we're 501c3s, we can definitely take positions on ballot measures. So I'll also share a link. Senior and Disability Action put out a slate of our recommendations on local and state ballot measures, which I think is really helpful, not just so people vote, on the issues that we think are really important, although of course that is part of it, but also, our speakers have talked about people feeling uncomfortable voting. It's new to them. They feel like it's not going to make a difference. And sometimes to say, hey, here's a guide, here's some information that we recommend, and you can decide for yourself, but to have something to give people can really help boost their confidence and make them say, okay, fine, this is easy, let me go do it. So I'm going to turn to Mike Dark. We're shifting gears a little bit, and let's talk a bit about voting in nursing homes and other long-term care facilities.
Thanks, Jessica. So again, I'm Mike Dark. I'm a staff attorney at California Advocates for Nursing Home Reform. Our constituency is really people in long-term care. So that's both nursing homes and assisted living facilities in California, but a lot of these issues sort of are nationwide in terms of their scope. And one thing that we have seen, I think you've all seen during the pandemic, is the way that the virus has really put a spotlight on inequities, structural problems that have existed long before COVID hit America. Certainly things like disparities in healthcare, but also crucially now, the way that people with disabilities, the way that people who are residents of long-term care can get disenfranchised from participating in our political process. And there is a terrible and a tragic irony if the people who have been most affected, most killed, suffered the most misery from this virus would be unable to participate in an election which is, above all, a referendum on our response to this public health crisis. And there are reasons for us to be concerned that that is exactly what's going to happen unless we act swiftly now. The problem really has to do with the fact that even before we got to the issue of voting, we at Cantor were fielding hundreds, maybe thousands of calls from residents with two main kinds of problems. One is they could no longer see any visitors at all, not even often through a window, certainly not in person. And a related issue, which is they couldn't leave these facilities. Now, they're not prisoners, but what facilities have been saying now during the crisis is that if you, a nursing home resident, want to leave to go to the library, even in some cases to go see your physician, you can't come back in. We will bar the door, and we will, or minimally, we will ensure that you have to go through a 14-day quarantine before you can rejoin the resident population. And as a result, many residents throughout the state are effectively prisoners inside these facilities. And the implications for the right to vote are hugely consequential. Certainly, it means that going to vote at a polling place becomes virtually impossible if you can't leave and be readmitted to your room. That means you may be homeless if you try to vote. An important related point is even if you want to vote by mail, and if you are in a facility, most likely you're going to need an authorized representative who you designate to come in, take your vote, and deposit it. That's not going to happen if visitors are not permitted into facilities. And practically, that means really all opportunities to vote are being cut off as things stand right now. And there's another sort of related point I don't want to forget about, which is that a lot of people don't realize that just because you have a cognitive impairment, whether it's dementia or Parkinson's or you are post-stroke, you do not lose your right to vote. you only lose your right to vote if you have been declared incapacitated by a court. And so people with cognitive impairments should still feel like they have skin in this game, and they do. Now, what's important to understand is that, at least in theory, facilities have an obligation to facilitate the residents' rights to vote. They have no financial interest to do so because it costs money. And there are almost no consequences, at least so far, if they don't make the kinds of changes that we need to see in order for voting to take place. What Canner has been doing is working with the California Department of Public Health, urging that the department issue an all facilities letter, which would go not just to nursing homes, but to other healthcare facilities in California, reminding them of the requirement that they facilitate the right to vote, which may mean designating visitors with appropriate PPE and appropriate safety precautions to be able to come in to facilitate voting by mail, for example. But unless someone actively intervenes to make the facilities do this, they will not do it. And another important thing to remember is authority during this pandemic is strangely split between county public health authorities and state health authorities. And so you may have the State Department of Public Health saying one thing, but your local county department saying something completely different regarding visitation or regarding access to polls. So it is important in trying to work on this issue to work with both counties and with state authorities. We have a little bit of time to do this, but not much. And so what we are recommending, what we are doing at Canner is working hard with state authorities, with county authorities, to try to get good direction out to people. And I think everyone across the country is going to need to do something similar in order to make sure that people who are consumers of long-term care don't have to sit out what may be the most important election to them in their lifetimes. Also, just one quick note, Judy Pollock at Canner has put together a short sort of fact sheet on some of these voting rights issues, which if we can't put up in chat, which we may not have yet, we will make available on our site, which is canhr.org. And we would welcome working with any of you on some of these issues that are clearly so important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. I always tell people Mike is one of my favorite attorneys because not all attorneys really understand community organizing and can talk about the issues so passionately and really inspire us to take action. So thank you for that. I feel like, okay, let's just get off the phone. We have a lot of work to do. Just kidding. It's great to be here to strategize with all of you. And thank you again to our speakers for the work you're doing and for taking the time to be with us today. So we have 11 minutes, which is not a lot of time. There are a lot of links that I will send out. It looks like people are having some trouble getting on the listserv. I think Yahoo Groups changed how it works. So what I'm going to ask people to do is be sure that you've RSVP'd. There's an RSVP link in the email announcement. And if somebody is at that email, if you could post that in the chat again, I'd really appreciate it. If you make sure to RSVP, there's a place to choose to be added to the list, and I will make sure to email everyone those links. So if folks want to go ahead and raise their hand or put questions in the chat, either questions for our speakers or if folks have ideas on you know, what you're doing in your community or how we can address some of these issues, that would be great. And to keep things accessible, I'm going to keep folks off video, but if you have a question or comment, I want to invite you to share your video. Okay, Christine Fitzgerald, give me 1 second. Okay. You should be able to unmute and show your video, Christine. I'm not letting you. There we go.
Sorry, did that, but okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Right, okay. So, because I have to use voiceover and chatting don't mix. I'm either listening to what people are saying or listening to what the chat is saying. I can't do both,
That's fine. We'll share the chat
Um,
later. I'm sorry if that's confusing.
right? That's all I really had to say was to make sure that all the information gets in an email.
Got it. That's an
Make it
important
a lot
accessibility
easier.
point. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Who else has a question or comment? So I know there's a lot of folks here because Ratcheta said so, who are part of the Rev Up network. What are you doing to reach disabled voters? How are you finding people? John, did you pop up because you have an answer? Great, go ahead.
So, hey, this is John from the League in Fort Wayne, Indiana. One of the things we're doing, we're working with a coalition of organizations that serve people with disabilities, and we're pushing early voting. In fact, because we have some additional federal dollars from a grant that came out as part of the CARES Act that has to be specifically COVID or pandemic related, we're going to fund transportation for people with disabilities to get to the polls early. So they're not out there in a long line when there's large crowds on their specific election day. Hopefully we can encourage some this early voting and we can draw more people with disabilities into the election this year.
Thank you so much. So Linda Taylor asks a question in the chat. Are there resources for people who lack computer access? And Linda, can you clarify what kind of resources you mean? I don't know. Do any of our speakers, is that enough information to run with that?
I can kind of come at it sideways, which is there are, especially for people in long-term care, existing and terrible problems with access to computers, iPhones, and the like. And they should understand that in California, at least, in fact, in most states now, facilities have an obligation to provide access to what they call alternative means of communication, since physical visitations are restricted. So there's actually some room to make a legal argument for why you should get access to a computer at a facility, or at least a iPad or a phone, if you don't have it now, for what that's worth.
Jessica, this is Shelley Hauser from Pennsylvania.
Great,
I started out as a service coordinator, and I can tell you that with the medical bills and rent and the low income that many of our consumers have, they don't have the knowledge or the money to have internet, to afford a laptop or an iPad. And even if they did, like I said, they wouldn't have the IT knowledge as to how to keep it up. And then if they do have something, it needs updates and they're not aware of how to do that, and then it just crashes and they're out of access. I know libraries have computers that are often free for the community, but like Mike said, if they leave the nursing homes, they're not going to be allowed in. So that's just my 2 cents of it.
Thank you. Yeah. Linda put a comment on that as well about people who have to use cell phones for information and who can't get internet. And, just a quick response I have, and our speakers can add on, of course, is that I think independent living centers play a really crucial role in reaching disabled voters. I used to work at an independent living center as a community organizer, and you know, we have lists of people, right? A couple thousand people who come in and use the center's services every year, and to be able to call them on their phone and say, you know, hey, what do you know about voting, right? What have you heard about the election? What information can I give you, right? Do you want someone to come out? Do you want someone to mail you information? Do you want to talk on the phone about why this election is important, about what's on the ballot? Do you have your mail-in ballot? Are you planning to go to the polls? How are you going to get there, right? Like really thinking through every step with them so that they feel comfortable doing it, and that they understand the impact, as Rachita said, right? So that they're committed to doing it, and committed ideally to telling their neighbors and friends and family to do it as well. And I know there were some people in the independent living world that said, you know, independent living is people make their own decisions and we shouldn't tell them to vote. And well, maybe I'll just leave it there and turn it over to our speakers about what would you say to that? Yeah, and anything else you want to say on that question of people who don't have internet. And I think everyone can unmute themselves. If you have a problem, let me know.
I'll add that I did forget to mention, we do have paper lists. So if you don't have computers, there is a way for us to get to work with the California retired, I'm forgetting, it's CARA in the state of California. The retirees,
California Alliance
they
for
actually
Retired
do,
Americans.
there you go, Alliance for Retired Americans. Thank you, sorry about that. They actually are working with us to do paper lists for our people that might be a little more afraid of technology. Sometimes our compliance system that we use is a little fast for them. So we do have paper lists and we do use that as well.
And Jessica, to the point you were making, I can't think of a more powerful thing to say to someone than you can exercise agency over your life by participating in the political process, because you may decide to opt out of voting, but politics will not opt out of you. You're going to be the subject of someone else's plan. So I think it's an absolutely consistent and important message for you to be sending out there.
Thank you, Mike. I always felt like it's not a real choice for someone who's not voting. It's because they feel like it doesn't have an impact or they don't feel comfortable doing it. You know, I don't talk to many people that say, oh yeah, I understand exactly why it's important. You know, that does happen sometimes, right? But usually there's some barriers that we can address.
I also want to just add too that I think it's important for us as a community to, regardless of who we are voting, to particularly on the internet, but wherever we hear it, stop ableist language, which we see from against people that, you know, we might not be voting for. We see people saying that someone who can't, who has trouble walking down a ramp can't be a president of the United States. It's ableist and it does not help. It only harms our community. So I think we have to be able to you know, in addition to voting, the ableist language is such an important such an important thing that we can be fighting against in this campaign cycle and beyond.
That's great, thank you. And Mark added, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. I love that. So unfortunately, we're at the end of our hour. I want to thank immensely our participants, our interpreter, Chris Perry, our captioner, and all of the participants. So this, the full recording will be up on SDA's website in the next few days. And part of it is on YouTube. I apologize, I had trouble getting it started on time. And please continue this conversation over Facebook, on the listserv once I get people on there. And then you can get in touch with any or all of our speakers, I believe, and maybe I can invite our speakers to put your information in the chat if that's okay, if people contact you, if you're overwhelmed and that's not okay, that's understandable. And I wanna ask if any of our speakers have a final comment. You know, what do you want people to leave thinking about, or what do you want people to go do? And I'll let any of you jump in when you're ready.
My number one is just make a plan to vote. Make that plan today. Particularly if you're planning to vote early in person or early by mail, just make a plan, stick to that plan, and encourage other people to make a plan.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I was gonna reiterate. I know it's hard and it's a difficult time, but in order to kind of address these issues and try to help better the situation, better people's lives, voting is a necessity right now. So it's important to do it yourself, important to help others as well. And please reach out to the organizations that you know are in this field for more information and more support.
And I would say that the biggest thing we have to fight is this creeping sense of paralysis that comes over all of us with what seems to be this daily onslaught of one horrible miscarriage of justice after another, and to hang on to the idea that it's not too late. It is not too late. The margins in so much of the country are slim, and everyone has the opportunity to still to change things, and I think that we can.
Thank you, Mike. I'm just gonna say, instead of paralysis, maybe we'll say the immobility, right, or the inability to act. That creeps over us, and that we can. Thank you for that message. Roberto, do you have a final thought?
I would echo everything that's said. Vote early, but only vote once.
Great. All right. I'm sorry we went a little bit over. Huge thanks to our captioner and interpreter for sticking with us for those extra 2 minutes. Thank you again. Oh, I'm sorry. One other thing is this issue of people voting in nursing homes and care facilities. It doesn't sound like there is much happening yet anywhere in the country. So if you are interested in that, please email me. I don't know how much capacity I have, to be honest, but I want to help connect folks so we can do some thinking about this. So put a note in the chat right now if you can, or email me. I'll put my email in here. I have 2 emails. Either one is fine, so that we can figure out what can be done about it. And yeah, take care and take action, everybody. Have a good day.